good morning and welcome. My name's Clint Vince, and I chair Denton's energy practice, and I co-chair our global energy sector with my teammate Emma Hand, and Emma and I also co-chair the Denton's Smart Cities and Connected Communities think tank. We are having a special edition of the think tank today, featuring a book being written by Steve Mitnick and Rachel Moore that will be published later this fall. The book is entitled Heroes of the Storm. And we are also joined in this webinar by our good friends with the Keystone Policy Center and their Key Conversations program. And to start us off today, we'll have a welcome by Paula Gold-Williams, who is the chair of the board of the Keystone Policy Center. And Paula has won more awards than just about anybody I know for leadership and humanism. And so I will stop there and let Paula get started.
All right. Well, thank you and good morning, everyone. Very much. I am just proud to be the chair of the Keystone Policy Center, and we are focused on having conversations about what's relevant in the industry. It is amazing that we get to do this with the Denton's organization and Public Fortnightly, Utility Fortnightly. Steve, I got a chance to meet him when I was in the industry directly and when I was a CEO. And this is not the first book he's written. He's written several that I'm very proud of. But I think what's really important is he continues to find and focus on what's relevant. And I'm very much looking forward to this next book that he and Rachel are going to be talking about today. I served as a CEO for almost 7 years. Sorry. Sorry about this.
I don't normally get music when I talk. It's even more impressive, Paula.
I have to tell you, I have a robot called Timmy in my new ventures. I have looking at technology. So I have a robot called Timmy. I don't know why. I think he listens a little bit too much. Maybe in the world of resilience, we've got some unexpected benefits here, but maybe that jazzed it up a little bit. I will speed it along and basically say, as a former CEO, it has been really, really important to recognize the people that serve and the people that do respond to storms. We are in storm season right now. There's hurricane season, and all across the world and all across North America, there have been immediate responses to the men and women who serve in this industry to restore. I think what's really, really important is this industry has a great history. The people are passionate. Our people, when times are tough, they very much think about serving. They very much think about trying to get people back in their homes and back on their normal lives. And this is where they step up most passionately. I think right now, too, there's a huge focus on not just restoring the way the infrastructure was before a storm, but trying and needing to make it resilient. So I very much think that what you're going to hear today is at the forefront of what we need to do to think about our customers, to think about communities, to making them better and more resilient, and let them be able to live lives with less stress that is caused by global warming and storms that are in front of us. So with that, I'll cut that off so we can go straight to the conversation, and we'll turn it back over to you, Clint.
Thank you, Paula. Thanks so much for joining us today. And I also want to recognize Joe Paparillo and Alex Ravel from Public Utility Fortnightly. And let me start with an introduction of Steve, and then we'll move to Rachel. Steve is the executive editor of Public Utilities Fortnightly, and he is the president of its parent company, Lines Up. Steve has been a friend for decades, and he and his team have really, in my opinion, revitalized Public Utility Fortnightly. Candidly, that used to be a publication we sometimes left in our inbox, and now under Steve and Joe and Alex and Lori Burkhart's leadership and many others, that's a publication we all reach for and are excited about, which is a huge tribute to Steve and his team. Steve did not start out in journalism. He was a heavyweight with a number of key consulting firms like McKinsey, Marsh McLennan, PHB, Hagler Bailly. And actually, that's when I first met Steve in those days when he was a superb consultant. Steve has an MBA from Wharton and also not one, but two Bachelors of Science degrees from Rensselaer Polytech Institute, one in physics and the other in history and political science, if I remember correctly, Steve. So we can check the box on whether Steve has a broad spectrum mind. And the thing that in recent years has caused me to admire Steve the most are the books that he has written that Paula Gold-Williams mentioned a moment ago. We'll be talking today about Heroes of the Storm, which he co-authored with Rachel Moore, but he also wrote a book about Lewis Latimer, The Hidden Figure. Latimer really played essential roles in the development of the light bulb and also the telephone, but sadly, he did not receive the recognition he deserved because of the color of his skin. And Steve, I think, has gone a long way toward rectifying that. Steve also wrote a very impactful book about women leading utilities. We actually did a webinar on that in coordination with the Women's Council on Energy and the Environment. And our own Paula Gold-Williams was featured in our webinar and in the book, as was Deborah Smith, the CEO of Seattle City Light. Steve has written from front lines to power lines. In fact, he co-authored that book with Rachel, and that's about military veterans in the utility industry. So with that, I will turn to Steve's worthy co-author, Rachel Moore. Rachel's a senior staff writer for Public Utility Fortnightly. She writes regularly for the magazine. And as I mentioned, she also plays a key role in the production of books. Rachel has a master's degree in creative writing and a bachelor's degree in English literature and creative writing. And recently, she was a recipient of a Distinguished Service Award from the Virginia Tech English Department. So with those oversimplified introductions, let's get underway now. And Steve, maybe you can start us off and just tell us what inspired you to write this book.
Yes, thanks so much, Clint, for your generosity talking about us and me. So I thought about, I knew you would ask me that question. And so in preparation, I thought I'd try something a little different. It'll only take 2.5 minutes to read the foreword of the book, which summarizes why this book exists and why we've invested so much into it. So I'm just going to read the foreword, which is as follows. When the storms come and our electricity shuts off, it sometimes seems like a perfectly normal progression. What can you do? Nature's fury takes on the constructions of man. Guess who wins that match? It all starts with a path of destruction. After a while, once the winds die down, the devastation is apparent. Now anybody can see that the power isn't coming back anytime soon. It is then when we recalculate things. How are we actually going to get through this, however long this is? And that's when our heroes of the storms show up. From around here, from around the state, from several states over, they come with their gear and trucks. They come, they form up much like an army here from their hometowns to ours to reassemble what's been so thoroughly dissembled by the weather's tantrum. They come so that we can plug back into our lives. The electric utility industry is a great one for several reasons. But one of the best reasons is this: the dedication, the courage, the sheer persistence of the heroes of storm recovery. This book is for all of us, but for them especially. There is so much to tell, chapters that are rarely written, stories rarely told, the sacrifices of the heroes' families left behind to cope alone, the essential efforts behind the scenes to ensure that the heroes are safe, well-fed, and have a clean bed for a precious few hours. There is more, the years of planning and drills so that when the battle is joined, the crews work as if they were choreographed for the stage, and the engineers constantly innovating, honing the equipment and processes to cut 5-day outages down to 4 days, down to 3 days, down to, well, then there's the utilities themselves stretching to harden the systems we also depend on, to make longer outages shorter, to make outages of any duration ultimately a scarce occurrence, even after the fiercest of storms, fires, and floods. It will be an arduous quest to zero outages, a quest now hastened by the growing concerns about a changing and ever more challenging climate, but a noble quest it is, and one replete with heroes. So that's why I wrote this book.
Well, that's one of the best answers I've ever received to any question I've asked in a webinar. This subject's near and dear to my heart. I have actually a big part of my work has been to assist publicly owned and cooperatively owned utilities in the aftermath of storms. So I've handled every storm in New Orleans for the past 40 years, including Katrina, where we had to rebuild the electric and gas system. And more recently, I've worked with Paula and other utilities in Texas after Winter Storm Uri. And your forward should be read out at our next industry conference. It's just such a perfect, heartfelt, and poetic description. So can you tell us just a few of the key takeaways of your book, and then I'll ask Rachel a question or two, and we can go back and forth.
Yeah, in a sense, it's 2 books in one. So there were 2 motivations in one. Certainly, the core of the book is where Rachel and I and also Joe and Alex helping out. We talked to, I think, about 55 or so heroes across the country in all regions, encountering floods and fires and hurricanes and snowstorms. And they were so moving, and we could talk to you about that. So that's the core of the book. That's chapters 3 and 4. There's around that in chapters 1, 2, and 5. We tie that into what the role of electricity in our lives and in our country and in our society, and how it's uniquely is the foundation for what we do, how we expect our lives to be run, how we expect to progress as a society. And that value and what it takes to preserve that value, what that value means, and then also how we can preserve that value and build upon that value towards, as I said, a quest of, I'm making up a new term with this, and that is zero outages. We have net zero that we're heading towards for carbon emissions, and we're going to go to net zero for outages as well. It may take a while. It's a quest, and so that's what's the core of it. It was, if anything, it's a reprise on my 2013 book. So in 2013, this book talked about lines down. You know, we've named our company Lines Up. And so the idea is, what does it take, tying these stories together to have a future in which we no longer have to be concerned about losing lives and property as often to the tantrums of nature.
You know, I've noticed in recent surveys that the public tolerance for outages is much less. I think the increased use of electronics and at home, and also the fact that many people now work at home, it just there is much more concern now about the duration of outages and the need to shorten them, and the need for greater, not just reliability, but also resilience, to different but very related concepts. Rachel, let me ask you, what as you did your analysis, what was most impactful for you in studying storm restoration?
Well, I think that the most impactful, the most eye-opening part of all these interviews for me as a writer, and frankly, as someone who's relatively new to the industry as well, is just how much planning that goes into this. I mean, we've talked about the book being a holistic portrait of kind of the restoration of our systems and how we attack the problem, you know, after the fact. But there's so much going on behind the scenes, so much going on in advance, and it's surprising also how similar all of these obstacles and challenges are in different locales and across different storms. I mean, we've talked to some people about storms in like the 80s, as far as back as the 80s, and as recent as now. I mean, we just had the Hurricane Ian in Florida, that's still going on, really. But so the idea that somebody in Florida experiencing a hurricane, and the people who are working on that restoration are experiencing a lot of the same challenges and obstacles, same problems as someone who's working on wildfire mitigation in Oregon, is really cool and really interesting to show, as you know, as an industry, how close we really all are. It's the same problems and it's the same solution in some cases, but I think the coolest part of it is that we're all learning from each other no matter where we are. And that's a really impactful thing to me. It's funny to see such a large industry suddenly feel so small and family-like in that way.
Truly so. What were some of the categories of utilities that you interviewed? Was it a broad array?
Yeah, that was one of the major goals initially. We wanted to make sure we got a holistic view, as I said. So we talked to a lot of different smaller cooperatives and a variety of locations. I've actually got myself a map. I tried to make sure we hit kind of every region possible. So we've got people into the Northeast, Southeast, just everywhere across the nation. We wanted to make sure that we were showing cooperatives, public power, investor-owned utilities, all the perspectives that we could really get, which is why I think that this book has had more interviews than we've done in the past for some of the other books that Public Utilities Fortnightly has done.
Well, let me ask Steve, and then I'll come back to you with a similar question. Rachel, Steve, how would you like this book to be used by people in the industry?
Yeah, that's a great, I would say that maybe in a couple of ways. First of all, like I said, the book is for all of us, but for our heroes particularly or especially. So I think that I hope, as with all our books, we distribute them to the entire community, the entire industry for free. We're able to do that because we have sponsors that support us financially to do that. So that book goes out to our community of 20,000. So I hope that the heroes that directly participated and the thousands of others throughout the industry, maybe they get a copy and maybe they'll shed a tear or crack a smile and think back to some of the things that they did, and it'll give them a few warm moments. So that's one purpose. For the rest of us, non-heroes, I would say that I hope it, kind of rejiggers our dedication to what we do, whether we're at a public service commission or we're writing about them, or at the companies or at the vendors or the professional firms such as Denton's. I hope it reminds us of the importance of what we're doing and rededicate ourselves to that reliability and resilience, how important it is. It's always said, and I've conducted surveys too, that if you ask the public how they feel about maintaining the grid and investing the grid a week or 2 weeks after an outage, the numbers are incredibly high. And if you ask them 6 months, the numbers are incredibly low as we become complacent and we forget the heroic works. So I hope that book has that impact as well.
I don't think many people realize the danger of linemen and restoration workers, what they face in the aftermath of a really destructive storm. I'm really glad that you are highlighting that. I hope it does go beyond utilities that do have awareness to the communities, as you say, so that people can have a better sensitivity for it. Rachel, if I ask you this same question, how would you answer it? That is, how would you like to see your book used by people in the industry?
Well, I think we've touched on a lot of the things that I'm echoing a lot of the things that Steve says, but also some of the things that Paula said earlier. Technology, efficiency, resiliency is a huge topic here with, learning from each other, learning from the experiences of different storms, and just constantly getting better at this. We are and always will be constantly getting better at this, but at the same time, Mother Nature seems to constantly be getting worse. But that's one way to look at it, and one thing I think is important to take away from the book. But really, the biggest privilege for me as a creative writer is getting to showcase all of these people. I think, we keep using the word heroes, and it's so true. I think that a lot of these people, we do take for granted how easy it is to just flip a switch and have power for all of the things that are essential to our lives, essential to what we're doing right now. Literally talking to each other across the internet is such a privilege and such something we really do get complacent about. And getting to showcase all of the individuals, all the organizations that put so much work and dedication into keeping the lights on and keeping the power on is a real privilege to me. We've talked to a lot of different people, from linemen to executives, but also, like Steve mentioned, people behind the scenes, a lot of different, people who have storm roles that, you probably wouldn't think have storm roles, but everyone has a storm role, and everyone gets to be a part of that team. And it is such a incredible team to get to show off. So that's really, really hope that people can take away.
Thank you. Steve, how are we going to have a chance of getting to net zero outages, or at least drastically improved resilience? What are some of the essential things that have to get done?
It's just such fantastic innovations around the country. I don't think we've been calling it zero outages, but because that's kind of a scary thought, right? Because we have to admit that nature can beat us in any fair match. So, but that being said, just think about, we just completed a report and published a report. I guess it couldn't have been more than 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we surveyed companies around the country about their investments and the advancements in undergrounding. And it's remarkable, and it's also an untold story. So, you know, you hear about undergrounding from time to time, and then it was really popularized by the great CEO of PG&E talking about that they would try to underground 10,000 miles of their lines to try to cut down on the wildfire problem. And so we started discovering the industry is hard at work at this. And we found companies that have been doing this for years. We have a company in Florida that has the goal, it may take a few decades, to underground everything, underground their entire system. And one of the things that I love about that is the public, you know, which always is, you know, can question, you know, what's the utility spending money on? Why are my bills like this and so forth? But when you talk in those language, with that language, then I think a lot of people in the public can say, okay, now I can see what my money's going for. Because if those lines aren't falling, you know, having trees fall upon them overhead. So there's that, but there's also great work in strengthening the overhead system. We have companies around the Gulf that are going from wood to stronger wood poles to metal poles or concrete. And we have that in the West for the fires. We have companies that are insulating their wood poles so that they're protected, and also taking those overhead lines. The public doesn't necessarily know that those lines are uninsulated so that they could be light, but insulating those and putting new wires above our lines so that they won't cause fires, using drones and artificial intelligence and the most advanced weather forecasting to kind of anticipate micro occurrences such as the derechos. And so that work's going on, and that's beautiful to see. So we're making some steps. We're taking some steps.
On weather forecasting, Steve, I know that even a short time ago, many utilities relied simply on historical data, which has really become not applicable, as to your earlier point, that climate has really increased the intensity of storms and extreme weather. I'm now talking to utilities that for the first time are speaking with climate modelers and others to try to be more reflective of what's really going on at the present time as they develop strategies. Did you encounter that in your book or in your analysis?
Yeah, no, this is one of the most exciting areas. Coincidentally, I just returned last week from the Association of Edison Illuminating Companies annual meeting, and I ran one of the sessions, and I was lucky to invite and have my keynote speaker, the amazing Dr. Sarah Kapnick, who's the chief scientist of NOAA. There's no one on the planet, I think, that understands weather and modeling better than Dr. Kapnick. So she started our session, and then we had some heroes on the stage, and then I engaged the audience to tell some stories too. So, but it is remarkable how one of the things I said was, I'm so old. I remember working in this industry and being kind of a pet peeve about the fact that when we forecasted, we neutralized for weather. We basically said, let's take weather out of our forecasting because that's random. But that doesn't happen anymore. If anything, the emphasis on understanding the weather, forecasting, modeling, and that affects our wind and solar facilities. That affects the water available for our fossil and steam plants and nuclear plants and hydro plants. That affects, of course, whether we're going to go offshore for wind. That affects, of course, storms and resilience. And it even affects the Electric Power Research Institute has this new initiative. They call it Climate Ready. But as they try to say, how do we make our systems more resilient for the more challenging climate? There are things like they talk about how we'll have to change the standards and the specs for our equipment. If we're going to get bouts of 115 to 120 degree temperatures, we didn't plan our equipment, our substations, our transformers, and so forth for those kinds of conditions. So we're going to have to review that and make sure that our equipment can hold up for that. So this is one of the most exciting areas that towards resilience.
You know, our firm serves as general counsel for the Association of Edison Illuminating Companies, and I got some very, very nice feedback already on your appearance there. So good job, as always.
Well, I always have people talking about my appearances afterwards, but for mixed reasons.
Well, you know, further to your answer a moment ago, I'm noticing that utilities are now replacing some of their major transmission towers with towers that can withstand up to 150 mile-per-hour winds, which is quite a major improvement. Even in Hurricane Ida, which devastated the Louisiana area, we saw photographs of transmission towers that were just twisted up like little erector set towers. And the cyclonic effects of offshoots from hurricanes also is devastating on those towers. Did you have a chance to delve into the improvement of the transmission grid?
Yeah, no. So it's always been. Originally, I'm a transmission guy. At one time I was CEO of a transmission development company, so that's of interest to me. One of the things I noticed that really got me motivated for my 2013 book, Lines Down, is that I work a lot with the industries, the power industry in East Asia and Japan, particularly. My daughter actually is in the industry in Japan, working in Tokyo. I have a lot of friends there. And when you go there, I was just really startled that, of course, it makes sense, but they don't use wooden poles, right? So because there's plenty of wood in North America, not so much available on the islands of Japan. So I noticed that their metal and concrete facilities are different, and they stand up to, they have some pretty tough storms, as you can imagine, and earthquakes in Japan. So it got me thinking. And then I saw this trend. We saw that with Entergy, Florida Power and Light, and Southern Company around the Gulf, and they started really going into concrete and metal structures, and that warmed my heart to see that, and that was back in 6-7 years ago, but they're accelerating what they're doing there.
I understand that Florida Power and Light's had some great success with the concrete poles, that they're much more resilient than wooden, and that they've done pretty well in some of their recent storms.
Yeah, it's just remarkable. Now it's complex, So one of the things about our system, just look about what happened in Texas a year and a half ago. But our systems are complex and they're interrelated, including with the gas and the water systems, so and telecommunication systems. So it's not easy. But the companies are really trying to triage the situation and saying, what can we do, this year? What can we do next year? And then long term, how can we build this thing so that as the CEO of PG&E, Patty Poppy, says, we're not trimming the same trees for the next 40 years. That what's known in the industry as veg management, that's a huge cost. That cost is becoming more expensive. The equipment, the supply chain issues, and the labor to go out, in the hinterlands and cut down the same trees year after year. One of the things I love that I heard from the Florida companies and in the Southeast is we're reminded at Dominion and so forth is we love our trees. And if anything, as our population's growing, as the houses go out from the urban areas, we have lots of trees, and those trees are often, they're outside our rights of way. But if they fall, they take down the grid infrastructure. So you can't go to the public and say, I want you to cut down that 60, 70 foot tree. So what do? And that's when people are thinking smart about undergrounding or insulated overhead conductors, actually literally moving just the distribution lines, the feeder line, the lines that are going to our homes, the 25 kilovolts. So I think that there's a lot of innovation, but we're facing up to that reality, as well as the reality of these tough storms and tougher environmental conditions.
Steve, I want to come back to you in a minute about Winter Storm Uri in Texas, but let's shift to Rachel. And Rachel, what in your analysis, what surprised you the most as you were studying storms across the country, and to your point, the different issues in different regions?
Well, I mentioned before, it surprised me how similar a lot of the challenges and obstacles are, regardless of the storm in question or the place that these people that we were interviewing are located in. But also, I think one of the things that will be very tangible for readers is some of the statistics that we've included, things like just how much was down, just how much needed to be rebuilt, whether it was more of a, are we getting things reconnected, or are we just rebuilding from scratch? So I think that is eye-opening as well, to have those really tangible numbers and tangible examples of, poles down, lines down, the different kinds of infrastructure that needed to be rebuilt or subsequently hardened so that we could not have the same issues. And it goes back to what I said about every restoration being a learning experience. I mean, of course, we're learning how to do things differently, more efficiently, and we're always doing things better. Of course, I really do feel that one of the things that this book gets across is that we're constantly improving. But I think that for readers in particular, the pieces that will be most tangible might be those statistics.
What are some examples
Yeah.
of improvement? I know just a short time ago, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, utilities tended to replace equipment rather than put in new equipment that storm hardened. What are some examples of improvement that you identified and were able to see, Rachel?
Well, Steve has pointed out a lot of them already, a lot of the insulated conductors and a lot of the pole hardening and things like that. There have been some improvements also with thinking about how flooding works. It goes back to something about Texas that we were talking about just now. There is, I forget at the moment which substation, forgive me, but there are some people that dealt with, snow and ice getting into the substation in ways that really they hadn't anticipated. So it goes back to anticipating the unexpected, really, coming up with ways to nearly predict the future, but in a more technological way, if you could say that. So I think that we'd be repeating ourselves in terms of the various technological advances for equipment and things like that. But also one that I would want to point out, one that's a big point in the book is safety improvements. A lot of the equipment that we have talked to these interviewees about has improved vastly over the decades. We've talked to some people with some long, illustrious careers, and people who started as linemen and are now CEOs. So I think that their perspectives on the way that safety has changed as an industry are really valuable as well. It's not quite a technical improvement, but the tools and the procedures that we use to keep everyone safe are constantly improving as well. And I think it's really important to remember, like you said, how dangerous some of the work that gets done is, and those improvements might be some of the most valuable of them all.
Well, I'm so glad you mentioned the safety aspect. We probably don't publicly give that enough attention. Steve, what were you going to say something a moment ago on the
I wanted,
subject of
I
improvement?
thought you were going, if we could get Rachel, that's one of the things that we found most inspiring in the interviews was the stories about how some of the heroes have to leave their families who also don't have power, don't have water, don't have, and leave for a couple of weeks to help these other people out. And so the stories about the dedication of their families, which is really something. And then also the stories of people sleeping in their cars or in flea-bitten motels without power and just a sandwich. Some of those were really inspiring, and I want to make sure we don't skip over those, Rachel.
Thank you.
Right. And also the book includes a section on like the communities as well, because one of the things that we kept coming back to in the interviews was, you know, just how close the communities become in these sorts of situations, everyone helping with the rebuild. And, you know, people, I think one of my favorite lines is someone was discussing, you know, you want someone to be conferred sainthood if they bring you a cup of coffee. You know, it's the creature comforts you miss out on, and of course also, you know, missing your family. And also the industry, it's a constant job. It's never, you never really stop doing it. You go on vacation, if there's a storm coming, you come right back. You go on your honeymoon, you come right back. It's Christmas, it's Easter, it's anything, it doesn't really matter, you're going to work. And it's really incredible how understanding and how supportive the families are. So I'm glad, very glad that we're including the section on that as well in the book.
Good for you. Winter Storm Uri, Steve, one thing that surprised me was the sort of the inappropriate blame that was given to utilities when it was actually a market failure that the utilities had no control over. The Winter Storm Uri, if our participants remember, more than 200 people died, 4.5 million Texans were without power, and some were without water as well, because in many instances, the lack of power affected water pumping and ability to get water. And ERCOT, it turned out, the regional market had not properly required weatherization, fuel supply, and also generation. What did you have a chance to dig deep in your conversations in Texas and see what's happening there and what improvements are being made? I felt that utilities got a bad rap because the communities would look at the utility and see the power out, and they didn't realize that the power was being shut down because the utilities were being ordered to do so by the market.
Yeah, well, there's a few layers there. One of them I want to, it's worth pointing out that when I was a kid, we had I remember the '65 blackout. It was the most famous blackout in America in the Northeast, 1965. And it lasted for 11 hours, actually. But it was written about for years. It changed national policy. There were congressional hearings and commissions that came from that. But actually, it was a mild inconvenience and actually a little bit of fun. people used to talk about it. There was always the statistics about the number of the births in New York City 9 months afterwards. So it was a bad thing, but it wasn't lives. And so, but during the course of the decades, we've now seen outages that last for days and in some cases weeks, that cause tremendous devastation. In comparison to my blackout of 65, doing homework by candlelight, tremendous devastation and kill people. So we actually have outages now in which there can be possibly hundreds of fatalities. So I think that's an important perspective on how this subject has evolved and how the importance of reliability and resilience has evolved. And so I asked this question. This is question is, that's from 1965 to 2022. So if we don't invest sufficiently, where are we going to be in 2042? How are our kids going to do with outages that last days and weeks in 2042? I don't think we want to have that question answered in reality. So that's one thing. About Uri is and the ERCOT's market construction. Don't get me started. But I would say this is one of the points of the markets and the ERCOT market in particular, because it really kind of took a few steps down the road as far as being a more purist market, an energy-only market for the most part, and a very free, competitive market. Is the goal of having low cost, and it has succeeded generally over the years in being relatively efficient and relatively low cost, which is great. But one of the things that comes with that is investment, a minimalist approach in investment, as opposed to the other markets that have requirements on the equipment, on the readiness of the equipment, and paying for capacity, and of course the vertically integrated industries. And so the result is you get minimalist redundancy. And don't get me started, but when I was asked. I crazily took this job when I was asked by a governor of New York to join his cabinet. I said, I have one question for you. I want to invest in everything. I want to invest in energy efficiency and renewables and nuclear and fossil and transmission. I want to invest in everything. I'm a believer in redundancy. So if you are a believer in redundancy too, I will join your cabinet. So I think we have to keep in mind that one of the lessons from Uri is minimalist redundancy.
Yes, absolutely. And it's, the ERCOT market worked until it didn't. And it had probably the most massive failure in the history of markets in the United States. I can't imagine a market that had a more near total collapse.
Well,
and they were within 4.5 minutes of
blame me or my profession. So I'm professionally, if anything, I'm an economist and an energy economist, and there's economists believe in competition and competitive markets and the benefits of that. We can prove that. I have been able to prove that mathematically, as most economists are. And but the thing we always have to remember about the electric industry and energy industry generally, it doesn't meet the conditions of perfect competition. It's so political, it's so intertwined with our lives in society. it's so difficult to build power plants. You can't build one on every corner. Can't build a transmission line in every corner. You can't interconnect with the natural gas system at will. And so it's not like grocery stores. And therefore, it is different. It is important to recognize that and to have extra, if you will, wiggle room or redundancy built in.
So do we need more engineers to replace some of the economists in running these systems? Steve, I know in the early days, many of the CEOs were engineers, and then there was an evolution toward more financial people. Mercifully, there have only been a few lawyers, and so that's why, since there are so few, most utilities are very well run. I think of you now more as a journalist than an economist. Maybe I should think of you with both hats. But
well, let me turn that over. So I think that today's CEOs, of course, we talk to them all the time for Public Utilities Fortnightly, and but I think there's a new trend, and I would say that their profession is leadership. And Rachel, I would ask you to tell us a little about, it'll be published soon, but we just did a portrait of a great CEO that just has retired, Jerry Anderson,
Yes.
who was the CEO of DTE Energy. So we call it Portraits of a Leader. And we just did that with Jerry Anderson. Rachel, talk a little about how he evolved from engineer to understanding culture and leadership.
Yeah, certainly. It was a really wonderful interview. I'm really looking forward to seeing that published in the next issue. It's a really, I don't want to give too much away, but as a sneak peek, I guess, he had some really incredible things to say about the way that leaders have a responsibility to draw energy from people. You know, it's not just instruction, right? Leadership is about more than just telling people what to do, delegating tasks and things like that. I think Jerry Anderson gave us some really insightful, I mean, frankly, inspiring thoughts on how leadership has evolved in our industry and as just a concept. Leadership being more about the people, just like the book is more about people as well. I think that some of the cool takeaways will be about the way that his mindset evolved from the beginning of his career and as he was leaving DTE Energy as well. I think that he has some really interesting anecdotes as well about some of the steps along the way. So I think that'll be a really cool piece for people to ingest and maybe hopefully learn a little bit about that, the concept of leadership and adjust their own leadership practices in some ways, perhaps.
what a compelling point, Rachel. You know, I've noticed, and I bet Steve has, when we first started practicing, the utility industry and beyond were more male-dominated, sort of command and control leadership style. And as we have had more diversity, and not just gender diversity, but all levels of diversity and evolution, I find that leaders I'm dealing with today have a much more effective leadership style. I think that came out when Steve and I did a webinar on his book about women in utilities and the pioneers and the current leaders. It really, that point that you have just made, I think became obvious and well developed. Rachel, were there any other, can you give us a sneak peek on any other leaders that you felt were just a cut above, that did some things that impressed you?
I don't want to name any names and call anyone out necessarily, but what I will say is it does really go back to the dedication of all these people. It's wonderful to see in these interviews, and I hope it comes across in kind of the narratives as well, how proud these leaders are of the work that their teams do. It's incredible to see, you know, how close knit all the teams are. You know, the crews, the words brotherhood and family came up so constantly in these interviews. And I think that it's a really strong illustration of how close knit all of the work that gets done is, and how close all of the individuals are, because it's so mission oriented. I think we've used the analogy army, it's topical books of our previous book, but also I think that it's so true that it's everyone comes together like an army to complete the goal, to reach the mission, and I think that that's some of the most compelling parts of these stories.
Yeah, and I would add that some of the previous portraits of leaders that we've done over the last year, Rachel and I, have been Gil Quinones, who was the CEO of the New York Power Authority. He got, now he's the CEO of Commonwealth Edison, part of the Exelon family. Sue Kelly, who was the charismatic leader of the American Public Power Association. And mentioning Sue Kelly, we've only given our lifetime award, we call it the Owen Young Award, to Sue Kelly and to Bruce. I'm sorry. So we've only given it a few times. I almost revealed something. We have one more that'll be coming out over the next few months. So we'll hold that aside, but no, there's great. I mean, we just talked about one, which is Patty Poppy. She, who would have taken that job, going from the CEO of CMS Energy to PG&E, the CEO of PG&E, with lots of challenges there. But the way that she has inspired her company, and worked with her public, or maybe many of which are a little bit angry with their company and the state, and really captured the imagination of the industry with some of the things they're doing there. By the way, she's an engineer.
Patty is.
Yes.
And Gil Quinones is a very special friend. I'm glad you mentioned him as well. We have a few more minutes left. If any of our participants would like to ask a question, please just use the Q&A feature, but not the chat room, because I get dizzy if I try to monitor the chat room, the Q&A, and have a compelling conversation with our guests at the same time. So feel free to weigh in. Rachel, what have we not covered? The experience you've just had doing the analysis for this book must have been extraordinary. What have we not covered that you really want to express to our participants today?
I think something that I've been thinking about as we've been talking that we haven't quite mentioned in so many words, a lot of these stories, Steve and I've kind of been referring to them as narratives as they get written, but they are a lot of firsthand accounts of real, historical storms. And I think that that's one of the things I think is the probably most fun about these books. It's not, Steve and I sort of eschew the word journalist, but like we as writers get to give a voice to people. We're not taking all the information, sort of boiling it down into a report. We're getting to show their stories and give the details that they gave us, the details that they care about, right? So I think that readers can expect a lot of different voices, and hopefully a coherent story amongst all of those different voices. But I think that that's one of my favorite parts of this book.
If you were to give one or two sentence statement about your book to the potential readers, what would that be? What would you say, just boiling it all down?
You will learn a lot about people and a lot about the industry. And I consider myself a lifelong learner. And I think that that's one of the greatest resources we can give ourselves, is different tools for learning.
Wonderful. I do see we have a question. Let me call on that. And then Steve, I'm going to come back to you. Clint and team, this comes from Fred Bunnywell, a very seasoned professional in our industry. Can your team expound on some of the ways which some utilities in preparation take proactive steps to help the workers' families prepare?
Oh, yeah, it's a tough one. I don't think, Rachel, I don't know if we I think they just kind of know that what they're signing up for.
There are also some
what do you think?
programs.
Yeah,
Sorry, Steve. There are also some programs, a lot of the companies, again, I apologize, I don't know off the top of my head the companies exactly, but there are quite a few companies that have programs to support the families. Steve mentioned, the idea of like, there's a hurricane that comes through and your roof's torn off, but you got to go work and your wife and kids are at home and there's rain coming in from the roof. There are programs and different pieces of organizations that will go and support your family. Well, we'll go put tarps down. We'll go make sure, check on things while you're states away, helping with someone else's restoration. So I think that that's really valuable for employees, but also for the families and the communities. So there are some details on that in the book as well.
You might want to do a side interview with Fred Bunnywell when we conclude this webinar, because I know he's done a tremendous amount of really forward-thinking work in this area with his utility, and also with COVID, for example, there are some real analogies of the heroism of utility workers during COVID. Many of the same types of experiences with families being removed from families for a period of time and isolated and so on. So Fred has really a wealth of information on that. And I see a question from another dear friend, Barbara Tyron. Historically, how did the culture of mutual assistance grow?
yeah. Well, that's, I don't know. We have a bit of that, but it's made me curious. Rachel, you comment too, about how it evolved. It really has evolved from the late 90s, when maybe it was somewhat informal up to that point, but it's really become formalized and reconstituted and reconstituted and reconstituted in the IOU community and in the public power community and the rural co-op community, as we realize how valuable and how important it is that we that we assemble and move as an army, and that people pitch in from states away, sometimes 1,000 miles away. I just want to add, one of my favorite stories always from this is, I love when people tell me that they were on a crew and they were in lower Manhattan during Superstorm Sandy, and the locals, as they said, would say, where are you from, with your weird accents, with their accents. And I always love it when the folks with the Boston accents are down in Alabama or from Louisiana or up in Philadelphia. Those stories are really fun to have.
One thing that has also developed is that how do you pay for storms now that storms are more severe? I've noticed that I would say the costs, for example, of Hurricane Ida, probably 200 times the cost of some of the earlier storms that I had oversight over for New Orleans. There are some states, including Louisiana, have passed very impressive securitization statutes that allow for securitization at low interest rates for storm restoration. But what did you examine that issue or see it come up?
Yeah, elsewhere, I don't know if anyone does it better than Florida, but and it makes sense because the people of Florida, everybody wants to save $1 or don't want to pay high electric bills, but everyone appreciates that we're all in this together. We don't know if it'll hit Fort Myers or Orlando or Tallahassee. The state legislature and the state government, they have a great program for accounting for and putting those and planning for those costs, knowing that it's going to happen over time. You mentioned Louisiana and other states such as California, such as Virginia, and probably countless others. Maybe Puff should do an investigation on this, where states have increasingly provided for the future and not just reactive. That's one of the beautiful things about it that's going on now in utility regulation and policy.
Yes, it's really developing. I would love to see Puff do a in-depth explanation of what is working now. There were billions of dollars of damage in Louisiana due to Ida. I mean, amounts that we're just haven't been seeing until recently, and we know that that's just going to get worse until Steve and Rachel can inspire utilities to continue to harden their systems and focus on resiliency.
Let me
Steve,
add, I just
yes.
want to add, I just think, and just everything. One of the things, most fun things I did was Eversource up in Boston. They gave me a tour of a 345 kV substation that was just built. It was, I have that kind of background. I love substations. 345 kV. Oh yeah, let me see it. It was literally, I think it's 20 feet off the ground. You could actually park underneath it. And the reason is it's near the water in the Boston Harbor. And so they're thinking ahead and saying, we can't lose this substation even if we get future flooding. And that stuff's going on at PSEG, at Con Ed, just all over.
I remember with New Orleans, which is a city that's 9 feet below sea level, their substations used to be underground. And with Hurricane Katrina was more of a flooding event where there were levee failures than a high wind event. And they had to totally restructure their system, and their gas system had the intrusion of, I think, 4.5 million gallons of brackish water. And so they had to, I think they led the way on shifting to plastic type of piping that could withstand flooding and other weather events, and that's been highly successful. Steve, let me ask you the same question I asked Rachel a moment ago. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to express, and any parting comment to our audience today?
I would only say something that I did think of when I was at a recent Electric Power Research Institute event, and there were some great speakers there on this subject. And the question comes up with the panelists, and of course, this is something that we kind of specialize in, is what are the regulatory and policy impacts? Obviously the public, would rather pay lower electric bills than higher bills. We have such income inequality in the country that folks like me, maybe, and you, Clint, we're not having too much trouble with our electric bills, paying them, but extraordinary percentages of our country are kind of living paycheck to paycheck. And so when Putin's war increases the natural gas prices, and that increases the electric bills, there's a lot of suffering that comes with that. So the question naturally comes up, we want to do all these things that are essential for resilience, but how does that work in terms of rates and bills and the public and the impact, particularly on low and moderate income of our customers and small businesses as well that may be at the edge. And so I think there's lots to be done on rate design. We have a long way to go in rate design. But on top of that, it's so important to show the public, the media, the political leaders and so forth, what we're spending our money on. Because it always seems kind of amorphous. We're kind of modest about our equipment. For security and other reasons, we don't talk much about it. But we need to talk about it. We need to show the public, yeah, here's where rates are. And the reason is that we're raising that substation so it doesn't flood. We're undergrounding this transmission line so it doesn't cause a wildfire. We're strengthening our systems around the Gulf so that when we have a storm, it may not hit your area directly, but we can take care of your neighbor's area faster and then get back to you. And so outages will be, they won't be 5, 6, 7 days. So we need to show that. That's an essential. So that I would add that thought.
Thank you, Steve. You know, I've run public hearings where I've listened to people come in on fixed incomes, for example, and talk about really the having to make the hard life choices of paying a utility bill or paying for rent or paying for food or medicine. And it's very wrenching. I think that's one reason that I'm so in favor of securitization statutes and other measures that do two things. One is spread out the cost over a multi-year period so that you don't have rate shock for customers, but also, to Rachel's earlier point, not simply replacing the pre-existing standard infrastructure, but putting in much better, stronger, harder infrastructure when we do the replacements. So that's the only way I can see, especially, you know, your point about all of the other things going on with energy inflation we have with the invasion of Ukraine. Our gas prices have spiked. The two most costly increases in customer bills right now are increased gas prices and more extreme weather causing hotter weather in the summertime, for example, and colder weather in the winter. So perfect point to emphasize. Listen, you two have been terrific today, and I cannot wait to read your book when it's published and hear more from you. But on behalf of our audience, I'm going to give you an ovation and an expression of our really deep appreciation for a great job. So have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks so much.